Hello, everybody. Hello, Sean. Welcome to
Bhaskar.
episode 5. I still can't believe we have reached episode 5 at this point, but hey, we're all we're along for the ride at this point, right?
We are.
For today's episode, we are going to talk about something really interesting and what happened to the classroom, what happened to learning, right? So again, this is AI What the Tech, a podcast about the promises, paradoxes, and problems of artificial intelligence in higher education. As before, I'm Bhaskar Ghosh.
I'm Sean Huss.
And in today's episode, our 5th, we're diving into the quiet transformation underway in our digital classrooms. Mm-hmm. Now, as AI becomes embedded into literally every aspect, and learning from writing assistants to AI tutors, universities are really grappling with the questions of authenticity, equity, policy, and purpose. Now we'll explore what it means to learn, to teach, to evaluate in an era where the machine has pretty much logged in, right? And it's getting better with every prompt, so there's literally no going back.
It is getting better with every prompt.
It actually is, yes. So the machine is actually thanking us for it.
Right. And, part of the problem, as you point out, is that it is a problem more broadly in education. Problem's probably the wrong word. It's more of a challenge in broader education. And where we see it most clearly defined as a problem is probably in online education. Distance learning, hybrid, whatever term you want to use for it. It's when you, for the most part, are not in the brick and mortar classroom.
Agreed.
Mostly because students in particularly asynchronous courses now can submit flawless essays in record time, and we've been talking with faculty, and they indicate they'll send out the prompt, and then within minutes they'll get a flawless essay back. As you know, we've been doing some of these interviews. None of the students will have attended any office hours, even virtually. None engage in any discussion, and these are all passing essays. And professors, particularly in the online realm, it's true in the brick and mortar too, but they're spending inordinate amounts of time trying to police this issue. And in industry, they have less of a problem in integrating AI. And I think they mentioned this when we were in Florida at that big conference. They were saying that of all the industries in our country and in the world, education's the one that has the most difficulty trying to get AI worked into its practices because of the need to create and produce original content and give examples, et cetera. And so while we keep saying that academic misconduct is not the primary issue, it is a big issue.
It really
and
is.
So that's going to be really apparent when we talk about online and the pedagogy. In fact, Inside Higher Ed talked a lot about essentially how their surveys indicate that over half the students surveyed in online courses are using AI. We did a survey on our campus just to check it out, and in fact, it was about 70% were using AI, 65% were using it to do assignments, and then when you drill down on some of those stats, 50% were using it in a way that may or may not be questionable, and 25% ultimately admitted that they were out and out using it just to complete assignments. So, and once again, this is a problem in all areas, but it seems to be somewhat concentrated in the online area. So we have an expert today, right?
Yes, we do. And before we introduce Dr. Jeff Aulgur, I'd like to say if you're enjoying this podcast, if you like what you hear and you want to support the show, you can help it by going and buying us a cup of coffee, right? So just head over to buymeacoffee.com/AIWTT and the link will be posted here somewhere. And, every bit helps and it means a lot. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, these platforms cost money, so.
Absolutely, they do, and we're finding out the hard way, right?
Right. We've run out of our free trials. That's why we keep jumping. We jump from free trial to free trial. So.
All right. Okay, so going in and introducing Dr. Jeff Aulgur. So Dr. Jeff is a professor of organizational studies at Arkansas Tech University, where he served in various leadership roles, including department head, interim dean, and interim associate vice president. Now, he holds multiple degrees, including an EDD in workforce development and graduate certificates in project management and Lean Six Sigma. A retired command sergeant major in 26 years of Army Reserve service, Dr. Aulgur is also an accomplished scholar in nonprofit governance and certified quality matters reviewer. And we are very proud and very happy to have him with us. So here's Dr. Jeff Aulgur.
Good morning.
Hey, Jeff. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
We are super excited to have you in our podcast. And today we are going to go ahead and we will talk about student AI use in asynchronous education. And we're going to have like a bunch of other questions for you, Jeff.
We should do also is make sort of tell Jeff's story, and that is he was dean of eTech, which is the entire online section for Arkansas Tech University. That was the online college. And how long have you been teaching online, Jeff?
Since 2011.
So it's been a while. So you've seen the sort of evolution of online education and its adoption, et cetera. So yeah, I think we have some questions for you. I think one of the first questions would be, how does AI change this, right? When you think Bhaskar?
Yes, absolutely. How have you seen AI affect student engagement, and how has AI played a role into this whole thing?
Yeah, and I think what has fundamentally shifted with the emergence of AI, which seems like at lightning speed, because I was looking back through my records to when this really started to impact me as an instructor, impact my pedagogy, and my first real instance that I documented and took action on was about a year ago, summer class, June 2024. And what you can find, and this is the same way I detected plagiarism. I rarely relied on Turnitin or other items. And it was the writing. And if the writing sounded well beyond the scope of what I had with the student before, what their other work looked like, and I pulled this one example, and this was a student who had some plagiarism emerge a little bit in the previous semester, but it was just the language. And what's nice now, at least in Blackboard Ultra, it gives us the grade level of where the student is writing. And quite honestly, most of our students, I don't know if this is surprising or not, and most of my students are non-traditional adult learners, I see them somewhere between an 8th and 10th grade level. And when it populates that a student's writing at a 12th grade level or higher, and their other work hasn't reflected that. And so I sent the student an inquiry. I sent him my findings, which was 100%. And he didn't dispute it. He just owned it. And that was my first trigger that, okay, this is now a thing that I have to start working for, looking at, because it was just starting to emerge in my world. I know the impacts of AI were out there long before it got to us. But it seemed like once we got to the fall of 2024, the floodgates opened. And I'm sure students, our first adopters, early movers, the smart, tech-savvy students were well ahead of me. And there's things I never detected. But it's fundamentally changed how we've... Honestly, if you go back and look at my teaching approach, I always used to say that writing was the coin of the realm in the online space. And that's still true, but now I feel like I have to bite on every coin to see if it's real or not.
Yeah.
And that's where I am today, is how do I change my pedagogy? How do I move? How can I adapt what I've been doing, remain creative? But I think the one thing I would share with my peers and colleagues is don't be afraid to fail with your pedagogy. You're going to have to beta test things in your curriculum, things in your discipline that may not impact you. And I know, Sean, you've talked about AI's ability to do math well or not do it well. That's not a big concern in my world. So the way I approach things might be completely different than how either you or Bhaskar approach it from your discipline. It's going to be very discipline specific.
That's a very interesting thing that that you pointed out over there. Also, coming back to that last point that you said, so you said students with like better AI literacy will thrive, while others are eventually going to fall behind, and this kind of exasperates like the inequality that's out there. Now, so would you say that AI should be, or like should AI use be taught as a skill, or do you think it needs to be monitored as a risk at this point?
I think it absolutely is going to be taught as a skill. And that's where I'm attempting to reframe, and most of my summer is going to be spent reframing my fall courses, thinking about how I can do these things, how, not exactly flipping the pedagogy, but AI is going to be a part of our students' world for the rest of their lives. And if they don't leave my program with that skill set, with that navigability, then I'm doing them a disservice. Because we know that how we're approaching AI, generative AI, LLMs in the academic world is not how they're being deployed outside of the academy. We work under a separate set of rules.
That's true.
And once they move outside, and the article you shared this morning, Sean, out of Columbia University, about the student designing and raising money for a platform designed to cheat at everything.
That's literally how they begin. Not to interrupt, but I pulled it up here. They have a manifesto. The company's called Cluely, and they raised $5.3 million just on Sunday alone. And the opening tagline is, "We want you to cheat on everything." And essentially it's built in, so it's got a built-in system that monitors videos, calls, everything. And so what it will do is it will feed you real-time answers in job interviews or whatever it is that you're doing. It monitors what you're doing and then just gives you the answer. And the question they ask is, why memorize facts or even write code or research anything? I'm literally quoting here, when a model can do it in seconds. So start cheating, because when everyone does, no one is. That's literally how they're selling the company, is to cheat on everything.
But don't you have to have some type of fundamental knowledge to know how to properly cheat?
I think that's the problem, is that there's a democratization that occurs with a lot of technology like this, and we saw it in statistics. So this is why my fascination with math is one of my areas of expertise is in statistical analysis. And if you go back to the dark ages, everybody's doing it by hand, and then you get the software, but you had to write the actual code, the programs, and then eventually it gets a GUI, so you just click a box, and it gets easier and easier with every iteration. And I kind of see that. And what you see at the same time is that the skill sets actually diminish, right? Or the required skill sets diminish, but you still get the output. And AI is kind of working in that way, but it can also explain its answer, which is the creepy part, right? And so I guess my question for you, just to continue the argument, is, you mentioned that it's about the writing, and writing is the coin of the realm. Why do we care about writing? Why is that the coin of the realm, and what is AI going to do to that?
I think from my asynchronous perspective, I use that terminology because the vast majority of my assignments were written works. Because I'm not doing math tests, I'm not doing coding. Most of my work and my classes are based around critical thinking, deployment, and I will often tell my students, there's not a right or wrong answer to what I'm giving you. You're going to be assessed on the quality of your content, the quality of your analysis, and the quality of your critical thinking. And I'm not so concerned if you come up with a box answer that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the effort that you deployed on the assignments. And many times students struggle with that, because I have students who is like, I don't know how to do this because I don't know if I'm right or not. You don't have to be right. You will learn from the process and you don't have to be perfect. And we have students, and I was one of those students who wanted to be perfect. So I would ask lots of questions, and it's changed the framework. And I'll give you an example from this semester, because I got to a point, and we've had conversations with some of the faculty groups about the problems and facings that we're facing. And I put a message out to every one of my students, which was essentially, this is the line in the sand. And I'm not chasing anything. I'm not going to go back and look at anything. But I also said, if you have used unauthorized artificial intelligence, this is your opportunity to self-disclose. And you self-disclose, I will work with you, we'll find a way and a solution. But if I catch it on my own, then the penalties will be more severe. And what this set off was a wealth of responses from, I'm sorry, on this assignment I used it for everything, to students who said, well, I just used Grammarly to edit my work and I did it on these assignments. And it turned on a light bulb for me that students don't understand what is artificial intelligence. And in fact, I had at least 3 students send me an email saying, I don't know what artificial intelligence is, so I don't know if I used it or not. And so we're making this assumption there's this standardized knowledge base. And we speak a lot about equity. And I have students that are very proficient at artificial intelligence. I have some that cannot define it and have never accessed it until they got in my course. So one of the approaches I've worked on is, how can I build small teams? And if I'm doing more team-based assignments with 3 or 4 people, chances are I can diffuse some of the inequities in those assignments. But it also forces collaboration in the online space.
So it sounds to me like, not to jump in, Bhaskar, if you want to ask something, but
No.
it sounds to me like if you work to increase engagement, because one of the concerns in the literature is that AI actually will reduce engagement. Because all they really have to do is just go type in a prompt or take your prompt out of Blackboard and just put it in to the AI and get it to generate it. So is that, like, do you see a lower engagement now than you have in the past, unless you kind of build it into the assignment?
Well, and I've got an example of that I used in my graduate level project management course this semester that had to do with stakeholder communication plans. And so what I did was gave each student an initial prompt to put into ChatGPT or whatever platform they're using, and ask it, and using the parameters of your assignment in the textbook, ask it to build you an initial stakeholder communication plan. Then what I asked them to do was to compare ChatGPT's response with what we've covered in class, in lectures, with some of the supplemental materials, to dissect that response. What did it add that you didn't think of? What did it omit that you think should be there? And then the discussion forum was to reflect on the AI's output and then generate a conversation between, oh, wow, you got output X, which I did not get in Y. So how did you do that? So it generates the conversation on how to effectively use artificial intelligence platforms to get to a product that works for you. So you have to change the idea of prompt saying, please discuss the DMAIC process in Lean Six Sigma, which, okay, I'll go plug that in and I'll get an answer. But if you ask them to say, here's a brief case study, ask ChatGPT to work the analyze phase of DMAIC or the measure phase of DMAIC, and tell me what it told you. But then analyze it. Is it right? Do you think it's right? So we have to change those frameworks so I can still use those, albeit I'm using them in a more limited platform. Because I think discussion forums are going to have to fundamentally change. Those of us in the online space that have relied on those as the required student collaboration are going to find it's just not as valuable if you do it like you always did it. Now, what I have found really compelling, and the more I play with it, and it's built into our LMS and the Ultra platform, is the Artificial Intelligence Dialogue or Socratic Conversations platform. And I've used that in just about every class. And what I've done is played, you could define the persona that is the subject matter expert. And so I built one, and I intentionally built, and I'm going to read to you the characteristics I gave to the mentor. And so I called him Space Dog, the corporate quality overlord, think Darth Vader. And here's the parameters I put in: Six Sigma expert, challenging, informative, impatient, grumpy, curmudgeon, believes in mentorship, desires for the trainee to succeed, encouraging, reflective, and understands and deploys adult learning techniques. And the students found, because essentially their mentor that they asked insulted them quite a few times. It says like, "Oh, glad to see that you're master of the obvious," was a reply it gave to the student. But the feedback I got on that assignment, and then the follow along, was they did this individual assignment. They had to do 7 to 10 prompts with a conversation about a specific topic is part A of the assignment. Then the second part of that assignment is assess and reflect on your conversation with your AI mentor. Then step 3 is again taking that conversation to a discussion forum. What did you learn from the mentor? What did you think? How did you enjoy it? And I found that they really enjoyed this interactive learning experience because they get to drive the conversation with the mentor. I will give them the initial prompt. Everybody starts with this first question. Where you take it from there is up to you and what you want to learn and what questions you have about the subject. And then discuss your learning experience with your peers.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do. Keep everybody engaged. There was this book that I was reading, and I think they'd mentioned over there that just because people are using AI so much, we are going away from contradicting each other to the point where we aren't having enough conversations, and which means we aren't having enough resistance in our relationship, right? So we aren't having arguments. We are moving away from all of that. And we actually, as a society, we need to have those arguments. We need to talk to each other. We need to have differing opinions about things, right?
Right.
And that's something that, that the author had said that AI is kind of taken away from us. Just like, the whole resistance.
The asynchronous space can be as collaborative as much as the instructor is willing to engage in it themselves. And it's a lot of work, but I'll tell you what has worked for me. For every class that I teach online, which is my predominant delivery method, I've got 5 this semester. First, I build a WebEx space for every individual in my course. And then if it's a course where I'm breaking them into work teams, I build individual spaces for each of those work teams. So what I get is collaboration in the virtual space through WebEx. I see them working through their student problems. They can ask me questions. I'm generally online all day, so I get to react in real time, which students see me then as a living, breathing individual who is here for them.
Right.
But it's an ancillary way to, okay, if we're not going to have the conversations because of the AI risk and collaboration within the LMS, how can I extend that outside of the LMS?
It's true. Well, moving on. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it, Sean. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, we're talking about a bunch of different sort of general principles. One of the things that I think we run into, and we ran into it when we shifted online. I remember the establishment. I'm old enough to remember the establishment of the online college and e-tech, and there's a lot of pushback on that. So there's always this kind of faculty resistance, the concern over adaptation and even burnout. So AI, for instance, promises things like workload relief, but at the same time, it sounds to me like, on the one hand, we hear a lot of faculty are working harder to try to catch people. And I wonder if that, to some degree, that's hanging on to the old thinking about pedagogy. And, their concerns about whether or not professors will be relevant. So what you get some that embrace it and some that reject it outright. How do we support faculty through this? You've been a dean and an AVPAA, an assistant vice president of academic affairs. What do we do to kind of help faculty understand that not only do the students need to be literate, but the faculty need to do that as well? And some of the things you're talking about kind of build that in, right? You know, you're learning to use it and you're building it in and adapting.
Yeah. First of all, I would say as a faculty member, you have to want to do this. If you're choosing to say, I'm too old, or I'm swimming upstream, I'm blessed to not always look like it, but I'll be 61 in August. And, I could be at a point in my life to say, you know what, I can just ride this out and I'll just do the minimum and not worry about it. Or am I committed to my craft? So, but these are things that first I think have to be addressed at the local level. If faculty aren't bringing to their colleagues or initially their department head what they're struggling with, how do we help them? And how do we convey to our colleagues that it's okay not to know? And it's okay to ask, and it's okay to fail. And many of the assignments and techniques that I'm building in, some will work, some have failed. And it's like, that's not the outcome I was looking for. And I think that's part of the process and mindset we need to permeate throughout our institutions is the freedom to fail as a faculty member. I used to advocate that one thing when I worked with nonprofit organizations, and I got this from the Canadian Engineers Beyond Borders organization. And every year they publish a highly developed, profiled annual failure report. Here are the things that we tried and failed at, but they use them as learning tools and learning mechanisms. So if we're doing professional development, could someone like myself or yourselves in doing a session saying, look, here's what I tried and I love this and it works and students engaged. But I went out on a limb with this one and it fell flat on its face, and here's why I think it didn't work. And we've got to find a way at our institution, and I'm sure colleagues at other institutions, is how is our faculty development going to reflect this? Are we still going to just put the focus on, well, you have a well-developed online course, an asynchronous course that, for example, may even meet the Quality Matters standard, pass the Quality Matters rigor, but still not address this question we're discussing in any form or fashion? Because you can go through the entire course development process and never talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and again, all of this eventually leads to an assessment for the faculty, right? That's because that's where we're kind of moving towards. So, what does an authentic assessment mean in 2025 at this point?
I've thought a lot about, and I've probably shared this, probably 80 to 90% of my students are non-traditional, and by that I mean our median age in our program is probably 35. We had a student that entered our program probably now about 10 years ago who was 70 years old, lived in rural Arkansas, wanted to complete her degree, and didn't know how to log into a site. We had to teach one student how to get an email address. And it took us 5 years, but we got her through the program. And part of that is, as a faculty member, is how committed are you to your student success? Because you're going to run into things you don't anticipate. I've talked in our pre-conversations about the student population in Arkansas. We have immigrant populations, and specifically in Clarksville, we have a very large Karen population, and I've been the beneficiary of having 10 to 15 of those students in my program. Many started at Ozark, got a technical degree, but they see the value in the 4-year degree. So I know they struggle to varying degrees with English because it's not their native language. Some are much better because they came here as children and have been here 15 years. Others not so much. But when you ask about authentic assessment, how can I connect? And I use a lot, my touchstone is Malcolm Knowles' adult learning principles. Because at the end of the day, for adults, it has to mean something to them. They have to have a readiness to learn. This idea of, I can't just give them an assignment, because if they look at it and see it as busy work, they're going to call it out. They're looking for what is the value in this to me, which as a 19-year-old, you're not always concerned about that. But if you're 35, spending money out of your pocket to earn your degree, they are hard-pressed to value. And so I have to continually seek different ways I can do that. And I think what I'm trying to get to is how can I make it collaborative between artificial intelligence and the learner and find the middle ground and the integration. But to me, authentic assessment is, and I may be looking at it completely differently, is does the student view it as authentic? Or does a student see it as something of no value to them?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that's come up in some of the interviews where we see that students in particular, if they see it as a low stakes, low value kind of assignment, they're way more likely to use AI. We haven't gone deeper with why don't you value it or anything yet, but that's something we'll do in the future. So it sounds to me, though, like you're more about we need to assess the process, not the product, and we need to link it back to real world thinking, because I think your adult learners are not that different from the 19-year-olds now. I mean, they're making similar kinds of assessments. I think that's the culture, that's the zeitgeist we live in, which is asking a broader question: is higher ed even worth it? Is this busy work? That means we're really going to have to shift everything we understand about assessment, right?
Yeah, and I've thought a lot about in the online space is how can I ensure my students read the materials or watch the videos I gave them? Because we know now you can take a YouTube video, plug it into a platform, and it'll summarize, give you the key arguments, and spit it all out for you. Kind of my low-stake assignments in most of my courses has been simple. I take direct sentences from the chapter all the way through, and most of them are just fill in the blank. And I can tell the difference from the students that have read the material, and I don't try to fool them. It's in chronological order. I just want you to go through the chapter and seek out these specific sentences which go from start to finish and fill in the key phrases, which, yes, it's very low stakes. But if I just give them a discussion forum to summarize the chapter or summarize X, Y, and Z, that's what I will get. But to ensure they've even read the material in a senior level course, I can tell the students who haven't read it because they've tried to plug in the sentence, they have tried to Google the sentence, and will put in words that are just complete outliers. And it's like, yeah, you didn't read it because it's word for word. The answer is exactly as it is in the book. You just have to read through and find the sentences I want you to find.
Yeah, and that kind of, makes me think that, like we were having this conversation before, like the inequity between people who have access to maybe paid subscriptions would be better than people who don't have access to it. And I think we were having a conversation about this as well earlier, where models that have so the paid models of ChatGPT, maybe for example, they hallucinate lesser than the free models for it, right? And this is an inequity that we're going to see in our classrooms as well. So how do you think, or how maybe in your class would how can students be given access or asked not to access like certain materials, right? Are there any rules that you think should be mentioned in classrooms, or how do you think that we should go with that?
So from my perspective, something I'm going to initiate in the fall, and I've often used course contracts as one of the first assignments, to where essentially all the responses are yes. You're agreeing to all these statements. Whether you read them or not, that's up to you. I want to do for my classes in the fall a specific contract that addresses artificial intelligence. So every student in every one of my courses will read this document, but then I need to assess also if you have any questions about these, or if you're unsure about a topic. Because yes, our students use AI, but I don't think they understand how it hallucinates. I think faculty are still struggling with the hallucination aspect of it. That, look, just because you put it in, you can't take that as the gospel per se. But I was thinking through from an institutional level. If we're going to address the equity issue, there's got to be an institutional solution that puts all of our students on a level playing field. We've done it with the Microsoft suite. We've done it with the Adobe suite. This needs to be the next step that we're providing to our students, that yes, I may have a students who are using a paid version of GPT, but if everybody has access to a high quality subscribed service, then we take that inequity out of it. It's not much different in my courses in using open access materials or OER materials, because if I can link a textbook to the library that on the open market is $80, but my department can buy a universal subscription for $150, I take away that student not buying the textbook because they don't have the money. And then they try to get by. So this has got to be, at this point, in the speed that we are moving, there's got to be an institutional solution to address equity.
Yeah.
Well, some platforms actually are now. I think it's Google on Gemini. They're offering free access through 2026 for students. But, you know, at some point that's going to be paid as well. So I agree.
Yeah, because that's going to be the lead in to, hey, we gave it to you free for a year. Yeah. You've learned how to use my platform. Some of this crack. Yeah. Smoke this once. It'll be fine.
That's right. Yeah, you'll like it. You know, the first one's free.
Yeah, I'll see you next week.
Right. So, yeah, I think the concern is it perpetuates structural inequalities, et cetera. I think you're right. You know, what we need to do is think broadly and think about ways to provide access. And that should be to faculty as well. But at the same time, we need to be able to have literacy and evaluate these tools for what they are, because there are other kinds of problems that creep in if you give everybody wide access as well, right? So, you know, it may be seen as a moment of permissiveness, like, hey, you know, we can't stop you from doing it, so here you go, kids, go nuts. So that means we have to rethink everything. Particularly even in terms of academic integrity, right? So we're going to have to rethink to what degree is it going to be built into the pedagogy, and to what degree are we constantly going to have to monitor this. We spoke to some faculty who effectively just said, you know what, I've just given up. That was their answer.
I'm not here to tease them.
Yeah,
that's my job. I'm just going to tease them and walk out.
And I've been honest with the two of you and some of the peer groups who've been in this semester, and because of how I teach and my pedagogy and being 100% asynchronous, I'm at that point in the semester with low stake discussion forums that I'm not going to spend 30 minutes on every entry screening them.
Right. Didn't you say, not to interrupt, but didn't you say in one of our meetings that you ended up doubling the time that you spend looking for these things, double the time?
Oh, easily, because in the past, 2 years ago, I was just looking for plagiarism, right?
Right.
And as I mentioned, many times my radar was not turned it in, but my sense of this writing ability is exceptional. What used to be an early trigger in the on-writing space is like, one, when a student writes better than I do, that's my first indicator.
Just wow.
When they're
Spidey senses tingling.
Yeah, and I'm trying to. I made notes on one student. Yeah, so this was from a student that I caught using artificial intelligence at 100%. So some of this, thinking through the ethical question, can I share some of this with you because it's truly not the student's work? This is what they submitted, but it was not their work. It was 100% AI generated. So I won't read it to you, but the words they were using.
Yeah, don't read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't read it.
No, but words that emerged in this entry were ethically transformed, ethically decoupled organization. What is espoused in their ethical policies? Robust anti-corruption policy. Language that most of our students don't use. Most of my discussion forums are very conversational. That's how most of our students write them. when it's not
Yeah,
conversational. And I'm just like, okay, this one's going through the ringer. Let me see what populates here. Or the old key used to be when they used the King's English, right?
Right, yeah.
When they weren't savvy enough to notice that they're using British spellings of words that we're not using.
That's right.
But it has, and that's why I'm making the decision late in this term. There are low stakes things I'm just willing to let go at this point because I just don't have the time. But that's where I've made the commitment for over this summer is how do I change my pedagogical approaches in the online space so I minimize the opportunity for this to occur. And if I minimize the opportunity, then I'm minimizing the time that I should spend chasing it.
Right.
And by doing that, as much we've discussed, is moving away from the outcome defined product to show me how you're using artificial intelligence in the process. Show me where you used it. Show me your prompts. How can I focus on prompt engineering? How can I teach them prompt engineering as a secret skill, right? You may not know this is what I'm teaching you, but you're learning that ability. And then prompt engineering requires you to critically think because you have to think and discern, what am I going to ask? What am I going to put in here? So it's moving to a range of assignments like AI-assisted research exploration. And one of my colleagues mentioned this in the meeting we had with my department last week, who teaches the graduate level research course. And so how can I use AI as a collaborative research partner? I don't want it to be a co-author per se, but show me the prompts you put in, show me the responses you got, show me like I'm teaching them in the AI avatar conversations. Show me your prompts, your follow-along prompts, capture the whole thing. Let me see your process to how you got to the end result.
Well, like it says, the next hottest programming language is English, right?
That's right. That's right. But it's interesting to me, not to dwell on it, but to go on a tangent. Some of the faculty resistance is always relative to this notion of integrity in the academic process, and I think that's really why there's a struggle over what to adopt and what not, because changing is very, very difficult.
Yes.
Because remember what we do has not really radically changed for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. We get new tools and new technology, but for the most part, particularly if you're standing in the classroom, it's pretty similar. These technologies actually rewrite it, and so one of the questions that we see quite often is what is integrity in the face of AI? What is this academic integrity? And another one in response is if you want to police this too much, and I'll ask you a question in a second. I just want to give you context.
Absolutely.
If we're policing this much, we're changing the role of the professor anyway. That's a technological impact. And we tiptoe into other ethically dangerous areas like surveillance over students. We talked with some people who actually use surveillance methods, right? Like they have to show the camera and do all that. So what do you think about all that?
Well,
I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
to me, if you're still using or moving to surveillance, first of all, are you reviewing all those? It's
because that's way more work. Right?
Exactly. Why not spend 5 hours building an assignment, an assessment, whatever it may be? Spend 5 hours on the front end to minimize that risk. Because to me, that sounds as if you're giving that student a traditional assignment, asking them to take a traditional exam, but you have to put in all these, Orwellian techniques to make sure the student isn't teaching. And one of the examples I shared is we're in the information age. Why aren't we building assignments that allow students to maximize what's at their fingertips?
Sure.
And my dark ages model was when I was early in the Army. You'd go to an Army class and they'd give you this literally a milk crate full of all the manuals you would need for the 2 weeks. We didn't have Google, we didn't have the internet. This is early 90s. But the emphasis was on knowing where and how to find the information. Which manual? Where is it? Discern your answer. Or another example is, in 1989, I'm going to a land navigation course with a compass and a pencil and a map and a protractor. But 5 years later, you're giving me GPS units that I can put in my hand. So are we going to go back to the compass and the pencil, or are we going to teach students to use the GPS and the tools that they have? And so when you talk about integrity, to me, it goes back again to how are you building your assessment? If your assessment is high risk for being compromised for the way you've built it, then you might need to rethink your pedagogy.
Right.
I think one of the things I've mentioned is this idea, and Sean, I'm going to flip it back to you for a second.
Okay.
In the sociology master's program, how did you generally deploy the comprehensive examinations?
Well, are you talking about we give them questions, and it depends on how you do it. Sometimes we would send them home. Sometimes you would sit in a room. That's the old school method. But typically you would know the questions. I mean, like there was no surprise over what the questions were, and you would typically go home with them, and then you'd be given a certain amount of time, and the assumption would be that you would look stuff up. You're not going to sit in a room by yourself like I had to, just for the record. But yeah, no, I agree that's sort of punishing. I do that with stats students, not to drift, but
no.
They always ask me, do we need to memorize the formulas? And I laugh and I say, no, just write them on a piece of paper and bring them in. I said, no, there's no point in memorizing them because they're written down somewhere.
Exactly.
You can always refer back.
Yeah, I've always thought when I took stats classes, there was always a limited number of notes you could take in things because if you
just bring a cheat sheet in.
But what if,
because the goal is to get you to apply it, not to memorize the formula. But I think there's going back to your example of the compass and the protractor, etc. I think there's a certain importance in knowing that skill, even though we have a tool.
Yeah.
And that's because my concern with AI is we create the opportunity for an over-reliance on the technology. So that's why, even in my stats classes, they still have to do the math. Yeah. And I show them how to do the math, but then they can go click the box, right? So I don't know. What do you think of that?
But what if you flipped that comprehensive exam model? And I discussed this a little bit previously, the idea of doing a reverse examination to where you're not giving them a question and say, answer this, but you might take it and shift from the content production to the student's ability to critically engage with what you provide them. For example, if your prompt to me was to discuss these 3 sociological theorists, but you give them a prompt that it intentionally jumbles their theoretical lenses, then the challenge for the student becomes, okay, I have to critically think to break through these things to discern what is right and what is wrong and make my argument on that.
Right. No, I think that reflects the same kind of skill set.
It does, but you're right. I still have to have a compass because if the battery dies on my GPS, what do I do?
You're wandering through the woods.
And so there is that. And in your previous episode with Angela Black, it's digital literacy. Are we teaching them the fundamental schools? We know they're not coming out of high school and secondary education with these skills. I told a former high school principal in a meeting about 5 years ago that my daughters at Pottsville, America in high school essentially learned how to game the system. They didn't learn, they learned how to game the system. And that's the student, the traditional student that's being fed to us. That for 3 to 4 years, they've learned how to game the system at the high school level with the expectation they can do the same here. And maybe that goes back to how do we change Tech 1001? How do we change Tech 1003? How are we building artificial intelligence, fundamental digital literacy, in my case, into all of my courses? And now this is likely going to be, for at least the next year, the first block in my orientation week of each of my courses, which usually would be don't read the syllabus, go through the schedule, make sure you had this X, Y, and Z. Now I want to know how much you know about artificial intelligence. Instead of introduce yourself, but now I want you to tell me what you know, what platform you use, and what do you know about these terms? Do you recognize them? Do you know what they mean? Because if I don't, as the instructor, have a sense of my student's capacity, either strong or weak, then how do I facilitate the journey?
Yeah, and that's very important as well, because at this point everybody's been using AI, like some amount of AI, knowingly or unknowingly. I mean, even autocomplete on your phones has an AI on it, right? So, so we've all kind of used some kind of AI, like it or not.
And
so
we've had
yes, go for it. Sorry.
No, we've had the integrity conversation around how the academic world, what it means to have integrity in use of artificial intelligence versus what it means outside the academy. Right. And the question is, as an instructor, if I use ChatGPT to create, now I give it the prompt and tell it what I want it to build a case study. I want you to build me a case study. One of the classics in quality control is a pizza shop and pizza delivery, because so many special cause variations can happen, common cause variations can happen. And so I asked it to build me out a case study on a pizza delivery shop with this data set. I need 50 data points. I need them to address these issues. And so I feed to it all the things that I know needs to be in that. Now, what it does for me is it generates the language, the verbiage, makes up people, makes up a company that would take me hours to do if I'm just sitting down and using my imagination. So how much of that as an instructor, and one of these questions, we have to also talk about integrity with us as faculty members.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know the answer, but how much should we disclose our reliance upon it? And I raised a question the other day, is if you're using publisher materials in the publisher's test bank for your exam, and you're not attributing that in your examination, is that any different?
That's true, and that's that's. Do you think policy needs to step in over there, and how can we measure whether it's working, like the policy is working as well? Kind of a twofer question.
Particularly for online.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as we as an institution who's still in the fledgling stages of coming up with a policy and what it means, is, to me, the policy has to be open-ended to begin with. It's going to have to be a living, breathing document that changes. And I guess my point is it so much the focus we need on the policy, or is it the procedures and how we implement the policy? Because a policy that you use in a face-to-face statistics class might be too restrictive for me in the virtual space.
Sure.
And so how do we push down this monitoring to the lowest level, which to me should be at the departmental level, or with those of us with multiple programs in our department? How are my colleagues and I using it in our program? Are we talking to one another? Are we having conversations? So the policy, as you've mentioned, several times, is AI is moving in dog ears, right? And so what we write and publish and promulgate next fall will likely be outdated the following fall.
Right.
And it's going to have to be an ongoing conversation. And it's my concern is we don't make it so restrictive that it's a one size is designed to put everybody into a box.
Yeah, there's no way to do a one size fits all. And I think one element, not to jump in, would be also some of the stuff Bhaskar and I have talked about in other episodes, is to create the necessary culture to reduce. So we talk about cheating in detection in online, but also if we integrate people and we teach them the appropriate values and the best practices on the front end, what we do is we kind of mitigate some of the potential cheating on the front end. That way when we catch people, they're really repeat offenders. They're offenders, and that's what policy should be tailored at, not at everybody as a catch-all, or at the departmental level. It should be literally at the class level. Each professor should have an AI policy, whether you can use it or not, etc. And I don't want to riff too much, but the bottom line is, you're right. We have to be flexible because this thing's going to change rapidly, as we saw with that new app that's coming out that allows you to cheat on everything. Right.
Right.
That's the goal. That's what we're trying to keep up with.
So at what point are we incumbent to hold our peers accountable in some form or fashion? And one of the questions I've asked several times when I've got the opportunity, when I'm on a search committee or see that a search is going on for a faculty member, is, well, let me ask you first, when you're interviewing somebody or considering them for a new faculty line, what do we tend to migrate to assess that person's qualifications and abilities?
Oh, are you asking
Yeah.
me? In terms of what we, well, given that we're 80% teaching, we always look at teaching and interaction with students. That's going to be primary focus. Then we look at, scholarship and the other things, but we also look at, generally, are they relatable? Do we feel that we can trust them? And, can we build rapport with them? I mean, is that the kind of thing that you're looking for?
Yeah, and I think you're on target, but I've talked to other department heads and other faculty members who don't give any consideration to pedagogy and teaching, even though, as you said, we're an 80% instructional. And so we've lost that focus. We look at their publications. Now, we're a teaching institution, but how much grant money have you brought in? But is that really serving the students that we have at Arkansas Tech University? And so are there places as peers we can revisit this or think about how we do this in our DPTC processes and ask our peers, maybe that needs to be a pointed question, and I'll bring it up in our department, is I would like to see everybody reflect on their pros and cons of artificial intelligence, how you're using it. Not as a punitive means. It doesn't even need to be assessed. But if we don't get a sense of what our colleagues are doing, generally we don't find out because, especially in the online space, we tend to operate in vacuums. Completely virtual. I mean, I come to campus 2 or 3 days a week, but I really don't have to. As you know, I can do all of it here from my home. How do we engage the communications? Because then we usually don't see a problem emerge until after it's too late.
Right.
Then we're reacting rather than being proactive.
And most of us know the colleagues in our departments and others that are pushing the envelope. And we know the others that, for lack of a better term, are clock watchers. And it's going to be those who aren't as engaged or don't give our instructional responsibilities the weight that it really commands, that are going to be the ones that are left behind, and they're going to be the ones that are struggling still. They're still going to be 3 years from now, they'll still be playing gotcha, because they have never moved off the dime.
There's a quote from a lawyer that says, the lawyers that learn to use AI will eventually replace the lawyers that do not learn how to use AI. Even at our conference, Bhaskar, who was it? Wasn't it NVIDIA? They were saying it doesn't matter what you major in?
Yeah, I think so.
That everybody has to major in AI at this point.
Everybody needs to know AI, because AI's kind of touched every field, and there's no escaping it almost, right? And that's what we're doing.
That's become what I've had to do in project management. So how is AI being used now outside the academy in project management? Because those are the skills I need to teach them. I don't need you doing a work breakdown structure, by hand in Excel, if you can get the basic framework from AI.
So the goal would be to develop what we used to call informed technical expertise. That AI then can help you do that, but you have to be smart enough to pick it out. And they do that in coding, don't they, Bhaskar?
Yep. Where you kind of throw out. They started something called vibe coding at this point, which is just kind of keep coding without using AI. That's a new thing that's coming up. But yes, you kind of you need to explain what is being coded by AI, because that's the important part of things, right? And come towards the end. So one of these last questions that I'd like to throw in over here. So, would you say that human learning is changing? Because sometimes AI is writing the assignments and AI is grading the assignments and AI is kind of doing the whole thing by itself. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, at this point, I have no intention or desire to use AI for any of my assessments of my coursework. Otherwise, why am I here? And then we've talked about it. What you have then is AI talking to AI. Is what we're going to be in this closed loop to where, I can set it up, but if I have artificial intelligence assess a written paper, again, what do you need me for? Now, what if I took that same document and I did an AI assessment, but then I added to it, put my spin into it, I comment on top of it. Maybe it can pull some basic things out that give me the conversation and that feedback. I do not want to see that part of our discipline, what we do as faculty members, because I think that's where, honestly, you've just become lazy. What are you doing? And when I was dean of the College of E-Tech and looking at course design, that is one thing I would often look for, because if you're teaching a course and all it does is require you to read a chapter, take a quiz. You have 3 attempts. Take a chapter, read a quiz. Let me reverse that. Read the chapter, take a quiz.
Take a quiz.
4 chapters later, take an examination. All you're doing as the instructor is pushing go if all that is being auto-graded.
Right.
What are you being paid to do? And is that a good use of institutional resources?
You're being paid to push go.
Exactly, right? Because it's all auto-graded. And I had one faculty member in the course design and say, well, I threw in just 2 discussion forums to make it collaborative. And I said, you're not teaching. You literally built this course one time. Probably you've used it more than once. And you probably used, if I looked at it, publisher test banks. So you didn't generate those. So what are we doing? Where is our value? And to me, that value is, I'll go back to the WebEx in my case. Where's my mentorship? Where's my hands-on? Where am I helping that student not just grow in their academic discipline, but as a critical thinker and someone that will eventually contribute in a positive manner to this bizarre journey that we're on?
So it sounds to me like that aspect of traditional education you want to keep and preserve in the face of this pretty significant technological change. Is there anything that should never be automated? Just absolutely, that's the line. We're never going to automate this.
Just strictly in the academic realm.
Yeah,
Because we've talked about things in that are FERPA non-compliant and those types of issues.
right. You have to be FERPA and HIPAA compliant when you use everything.
To me, I guess the bottom line is still your fundamental assessment. I don't care if you're auto-grading multiple choice questions. Okay, we all do that. I use Blackboard Ultra, and one of its tools that I really enjoy is creating rubrics. Because I used to hate building out rubrics. It would take you a good solid day to build an effective rubric.
Right. It's annoying.
No, but in the online space, and what may be different than most of my face-to-face colleagues, is I have deliverables every week. You're going to give me 2 or 3 deliverables every week. So much of my time is spent grading and assessing and giving feedback. So again, where's the value in me and the knowledge that I bring if I'm not sharing that? So again, the bottom line would be is, can it assist you in student assessment? Yes. Should you rely on it completely? Absolutely not.
No, sounds good.
Yep.
Well, I think that kind of puts us in the range of drawing some conclusions at this point, right, Bhaskar?
Absolutely. And we really appreciate all of these thoughts and all of your point of view on this, and that helps us kind of understand where AI is in different realms and in different spaces almost.
Well, I think there are tensions like speed versus thoughtfulness, access versus inequity, power and purpose, and we have to realize that we can't just think of AI as trying to reshape students and change their thinking. back to an ethical model, it's going to reshape teachers as well. I mean, that's kind of the lathe part of the title is that, you turn a lathe and you reshape things. So, we just need to think generally about how we preserve humanity, how we make things more human than less.
Well, remember, the calculator was going to ruin mathematical education.
Yeah.
The internet was going to be the first death for the academy.
I still think it kind of is.
Well,
that's a different podcast.
We could argue that's a different podcast. We could have it a later date. But thank you for having me. I've appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for
All right,
coming.
take care, gentlemen.
Thank you. Bye.
You too. We talked about artificial intelligence reshaping our tools and our online and what meaning goes into teaching and learning itself. So thanks again to Jeff Aulgur, Dr. Jeff Aulgur.
Big shout out. Yep.
Thank everybody for listening. Next time, we're going to take on the more complicated thing that I think faculty are really most interested in, and students as well. And it's a little bit controversial, and that's essentially academic misconduct. So I'm going to see if I can't lock in Will Cooper to come and talk to us. We may have some other guests there as well, because the process is actually a little more complicated. We've seen an uptick in the number of reports, given the fact that Turnitin kind of flags people. And so we'll talk a little bit, I think, about Turnitin at that point. You're going to understand why we're kind of skeptical of Turnitin. So.
And I think it's going to be a good episode. I think it's going to it's going to be pretty informative for all the professors and all the students as well, just to kind of understand how academic misconduct works in both worlds, right? Right, because it's not as simple as just reporting. It triggers all these other things, and so we'll talk about that process. Any big takeaways from you on this? So I would think for faculty, I think we need to start learning out loud. We need to let everybody know what's going on. For students, we need to teach them how to be more transparent, and some of them already are. And for our leaders to listen, lead, and leave room for some uncertainty as well, right? That's I agree. I like the idea of making mistakes, because that's going to happen. Absolutely. So it's not the end of the world if somebody screws up. That's true, and this needs to be said more often. Right. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying our podcast, like I said, if you like what you hear, go out there, support us, and you can keep it going by buying us a cup of coffee. Just head over to buymeacoffee.com/AIWTT, and every little bit helps. Until then, this is Bhaskar Ghosh. I'm Sean Huss. And this has been AI While the Tech. See you on the next one. See you around.